I never thought watching my neighbors slowly lose their minds would become my favorite winter pastime. But when Sharon Whitfield and the Pine Ridge HOA board decided to ban snowplows from our streets in Aurora, Colorado, I knew I was in for something special. It started on a Tuesday morning in late January when I found the letter taped to my front door. The envelope was cream-colored, embossed with the Pine Ridge Community Association logo, and sealed with the kind of self-importance only an HOA could muster. I was standing there in my driveway, coffee in hand, still wearing my bathrobe because I worked from home and had nowhere to be until my first video call at 9. The temperature was hovering around 15 degrees, and my breath came out in thick clouds as I tore open the envelope. "Dear residents," it began, and I could already hear Sharon's nasally voice in my head. "After careful consideration and numerous complaints from concerned homeowners, the Pine Ridge HOA board has voted to implement an immediate ban on commercial snowplow services operating on our private community streets. The excessive noise, damage to curbs and landscaping, and safety concerns have necessitated this action. Residents are responsible for clearing snow from the street in front of their properties using manual methods only. Failure to comply will result in fines beginning at $200. Thank you for your cooperation in maintaining our beautiful community." I read it 3 times, certain I was missing something. We lived in Aurora, Colorado, where winter wasn't a suggestion. It was a 6-month commitment to ice, snow, and the kind of cold that made your nostril hairs freeze solid. Our neighborhood had seen an average of 40 inches of snow every winter for the past decade. The idea of manually shoveling streets designed for 20 houses was insane. I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Marcus, who lived 2 streets over. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding as bewildered as I felt. "Did you get the letter?" I asked, "about the snowplows?" "Yeah, man, Sharon's finally lost it. My wife thinks it's because the plow guy dinged her precious mailbox last month. The Victorian one with the hand-painted flowers." "That's the one." Apparently, she filed a complaint with the HOA, the city, the county, and probably the governor. When nobody cared enough to do anything, she convinced the board to ban all plows. I looked up at the gray sky, heavy and pregnant with the promise of more snow. The weather forecast had been talking about a major storm system moving in from Wyoming. 3 to 5 feet over the next week, they said, possibly more in the foothills. "This is going to be a disaster," I muttered. "Oh, absolutely," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "I'm getting my camera ready. This is going to be better than reality TV." He wasn't wrong. I worked as a software consultant, which meant my schedule was flexible, and my entertainment options during Colorado winters were limited. Watching the HOA deal with the consequences of their own stupidity sounded like the best show in town. The snow started falling Thursday night. I was in my home office, wrapping up a project for a client in California, when the first flakes began drifting past my window. They were the big, fat kind that looked pretty in movies, but meant serious accumulation. By the time I went to bed at 11, there were already 4 inches on the ground, and the weather app on my phone had upgraded the storm warning to a winter storm watch. I woke up Friday morning to a world transformed into a white hellscape. My bedroom window looked out over the street, and I could barely see the outline of my neighbor's house across the way. The snow had piled up to at least 18 inches overnight, and it was still coming down in thick, relentless sheets. The wind had picked up too, creating drifts that reached halfway up my front door. I made coffee and settled into my favorite chair by the living room window, laptop balanced on my knees. I had calls scheduled throughout the day, but I also had front row seats to the greatest show in Pine Ridge history. Sharon appeared first, naturally. She emerged from her house at 7:30 sharp, dressed in a purple parka that looked like it cost more than my car payment. She had matching purple snow boots and carried a shovel that appeared brand new, the price tag still dangling from the handle. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and even from my window, I could see the determined set of her jaw. She marched to the end of her driveway, planted her shovel in the snow, and began to dig. For about 30 seconds, she maintained an impressive pace. Then reality set in. 18 inches of wet, heavy snow is not forgiving. It does not care about your HOA title or your designer winter gear. Sharon's movement slowed, her back bent at an awkward angle, and after maybe 5 minutes of actual work, she stopped completely, hands on her knees, breathing hard enough that I could see the clouds of vapor even from across the street. My doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marcus standing there with a thermos and a grin that could light up Denver. "You watching this?" he asked, pushing past me into the warmth of my entryway. "Front row seat. Good man." Jessica's got the kids doing online school, so I told her I was coming over here to discuss important neighborhood business. Is that what we're calling it? Absolutely. This is civic engagement at its finest. We settled in by the window, and Marcus poured us both cups of what turned out to be excellent hot chocolate spiked with peppermint schnapps. It was barely 8 in the morning, but these were extraordinary circumstances. By 9, half the neighborhood had emerged to deal with their mandatory snow removal duties. The HOA letter had been very clear. Each resident was responsible for clearing the street directly in front of their property, curb to curb. On our street alone, that meant about 30 feet of roadway per house, and our street was one of the shorter ones in Pine Ridge. Tom Hendricks, who lived in the corner house, was out with his teenage sons. They'd formed an assembly line, attacking the snow with the efficiency of people who'd clearly done manual labor before. Tom owned a construction company, and his boys had been working summers on job sites since they were 14. They made steady progress, but even their impressive effort looked futile against the sheer volume of snow. Across the street, Diane Morrison had given up after clearing maybe 10 feet. She'd gone back inside, and I could see her through her living room window, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. Probably calling Sharon to complain, which was ironic since Sharon was the one who'd created this mess. "How long do you think before someone breaks?" Marcus asked, munching on the breakfast burrito he'd brought with him. Define breaks. Either hires a plow and risks the fine or physically assaults Sharon. I considered this. The fine's $200 for the first offense. A plow service costs maybe $100 for the season. Some people are definitely going to risk it. But Sharon will be watching. You know she will. Oh, absolutely. She's probably already got her camera ready. As if summoned by our conversation, Sharon finished her pitiful attempt at snow removal and marched back into her house. 10 minutes later, she re-emerged with a professional-looking camera and a lawn chair. She set up shop in her garage, door open, camera trained on the street, wrapped in a blanket like some kind of deranged surveillance operator. "You have got to be kidding me," Marcus breathed. "She's going to sit there and watch everyone dig out. She's going to make sure nobody cheats. That woman needs a hobby. This is her hobby. This is what brings her joy." The snow continued falling all through Friday and into Friday night. By Saturday morning, we had 30 inches on the ground, and the drifts were reaching 4 feet in places. The main roads in Aurora were clear, because the city had actual snowplows and a functioning brain, but Pine Ridge Drive and all its tributary streets were impassable. Cars were buried up to their door handles. Mailboxes had disappeared entirely. And Sharon Whitfield was still sitting in her garage like a purple-clad sentinel, documenting everyone's misery. I ventured out Saturday afternoon to clear my own driveway. I wasn't about to tackle the street because that was ridiculous, and I was prepared to pay whatever fine Sharon wanted to throw at me. My driveway alone took me 2 hours, and by the end, my back was screaming and my shoulders felt like they'd been worked over with a baseball bat. I was 42 years old and in decent shape, but manual snow removal on this scale was something else entirely. As I was finishing up, my neighbor to the right, Patricia Green, came over. She was in her late 60s, a retired school teacher who lived alone after her husband passed 3 years ago. "Isaac," she said, her voice tight with stress, "I can't do this. I tried this morning and I think I pulled something in my back. The HOA is going to fine me, but I physically cannot shovel that much snow." I looked at the street in front of her house, still buried under 2.5 feet of heavy snow. Then I looked at Sharon's house, where I could see the silhouette of her in the garage window. "Don't worry about it," I told Patricia. "If they fine you, we'll fight it. You have medical documentation from when I had my hip replacement 2 years ago, yes. Then you're covered under reasonable accommodation. They can't force you to do something that's medically impossible. I'll help you write the response if they send a fine letter." Her relief was visible. "Thank you. I just don't know what Sharon was thinking with this policy." I knew exactly what Sharon was thinking. She wasn't. She was reacting, the way she always reacted, with authoritarian overreach and zero consideration for consequences. In the 3 years I'd lived in Pine Ridge, Sharon had tried to ban basketball hoops, limit garage door openings to twice daily, mandate specific Christmas decoration colors, and force everyone to replace their mailboxes with identical models she'd selected. The HOA board kept her in check most of the time, but occasionally, something slipped through. This snowplow ban was her magnum opus of bad decisions. Sunday brought a brief respite from the snow, but temperatures that dropped into the single digits. The street had become a frozen tundra, with ruts and trenches where people had attempted to shovel, creating a hazardous obstacle course. Nobody could get their cars out. Nobody could get anywhere. We were effectively trapped in our own neighborhood while the rest of Aurora functioned normally just beyond our private streets. That's when the first rebellion started. Sunday evening, I heard the distant rumble of a truck engine. I looked out my window to see a commercial plow truck turning onto our street, amber lights flashing. Someone had called in reinforcements. Sharon burst from her house like she'd been shot from a cannon. She was still in her pajamas, fuzzy slippers and all, but she had her phone in one hand and was frantically waving her other arm at the truck. The plow driver, a middle-aged guy with a beard and a very tired expression, rolled down his window. I couldn't hear the conversation from inside my house, but I didn't need to. Sharon was gesturing wildly, pointing at signs, probably threatening legal action. The driver looked from her to the buried street, shook his head and backed out of Pine Ridge. Whoever had called him had probably promised cash, but no amount of money was worth dealing with whatever liability Sharon was threatening. Marcus called me immediately. "Did you see that?" She actually chased off a plow truck in her slippers. "We're living in a dictatorship." A frozen, ridiculous dictatorship. Monday morning brought another 6 inches of snow and a growing sense of desperation among the residents. People had started calling in sick to work because they literally could not leave their houses. The main entrance to Pine Ridge was technically plowed because it connected to a public street, but once you turned into the neighborhood, you were driving through snow deep enough to high center most vehicles. I was on a video call with a client when I heard shouting outside. I muted myself and looked out the window to see a full-blown argument happening in the middle of the street. Sharon was there, naturally, along with 4 other board members: Richard Chambers, Linda Wu, Barbara Dennison, and Keith Thompson. Facing them were at least a dozen angry residents, including Tom Hendricks, Marcus, and Deanne Morrison. I told my client I had an emergency and would call back, then grabbed my coat and headed outside. The wind cut through my layers immediately, but the drama was too good to miss. "This is insane," Tom was yelling, his face red from cold and anger. "My wife has a job in Denver. She can't get to work. We're losing income because of this idiotic policy." "The policy was voted on and approved by the board," Sharon said, her voice icy calm. "If you have complaints, you can submit them in writing at the next meeting. The next meeting is in 3 weeks. We need the streets plowed now. That's not possible under current community guidelines. Then change the guidelines. We'll take it under advisement." Marcus stepped forward. "Sharon, this isn't about your damaged mailbox. This is about the safety and well-being of 50 families. We're snowed in. We can't get emergency services in here if we need them. What happens if someone has a heart attack? Emergency services have access to appropriate equipment," Sharon replied. "But we don't. We're just people with shovels trying to clear streets that were never meant to be cleared by hand." That's when Barbara Dennison, one of the more reasonable board members, spoke up. "Sharon, maybe we should consider a temporary suspension of the ban. Just until this storm system passes." Sharon's face went rigid. "Absolutely not. The ban was implemented for very specific reasons related to property damage and noise complaints. Those concerns haven't changed." "The concerns were from you," Tom said. "You're the only one who complained about the plows. Everyone else was fine with them." "That's irrelevant. The board voted." "The board rubber stamps whatever you want," Deanne chimed in. "Everyone knows you run that board like your personal fiefdom." Sharon drew herself up to her full height, which was maybe 5'4" in her snow boots. "I don't appreciate your tone. This community has rules and standards. If you don't like them, you're welcome to move elsewhere." The silence that followed was dangerous. I could see Tom's fists clenching, could feel the anger radiating off the group. We were all cold, all frustrated, all staring at the architect of our suffering, and she was completely unmoved. "This isn't over," Marcus said finally. "We're going to organize a vote. We're going to remove you from the board." "You can certainly try," Sharon said. "You'll need signatures from 60% of homeowners to call a special election, and votes from 75% to remove a board member. Good luck with that." She turned and walked back to her house, leaving us standing in the freezing street surrounded by walls of snow. That night, I couldn't sleep. The unfairness of the situation gnawed at me. I'd dealt with difficult people my whole life, but Sharon represented a special category of petty tyrant. She had just enough power to make everyone miserable, and just enough procedural protection to make removing her nearly impossible. Tuesday brought more snow. Another 8 inches. We were now sitting at over 40 inches accumulated, with drifts reaching 6 feet in places. The street had become impassable even on foot. People were wading through thigh-deep snow just to check their mailboxes. I was watching from my window, drinking my morning coffee, when I saw Patricia Green slip and fall. She went down hard, disappearing into a snowbank, and didn't get back up immediately. I was out the door in seconds, running through the snow in just my house slippers and bathrobe. "Patricia, are you okay?" She was lying on her side, face pale, breathing hard. "My hip. I think I twisted it." I helped her sit up, but she winced in pain when she tried to put weight on her left leg. This was bad. This was exactly what Marcus had warned about. We had a medical emergency and the street was impassable. "I'm calling 911, I said, pulling out my phone. The dispatcher was professional and calm. Yes, they would send an ambulance. No, they couldn't guarantee how long it would take to reach us because Pine Ridge streets were listed as impassable in their system. They would do their best. I called Marcus, and he came running with Tom Hendricks. Together, we managed to get Patricia back into her house and settled on her couch with ice on her hip. She insisted she was fine, just shaken, but I could see the pain in her eyes. The ambulance took 45 minutes to arrive. 45 minutes. It had to park at the entrance to Pine Ridge, and the paramedics had to walk in carrying their equipment through hundreds of yards of deep snow. By the time they reached Patricia's house, they were exhausted and angry. "What the hell is wrong with your neighborhood?" One of them asked me as they examined Patricia. "Every other street in Aurora is plowed. Why is this one like Antarctica?" "HOA banned snowplows," I said. He stared at me. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Trust me, we know. Patricia ended up being okay. She'd aggravated her old hip injury, but nothing was broken. The paramedics gave her pain medication and advised rest, but the incident had shaken everyone. Marcus, Tom, and I stood in Patricia's driveway after the ambulance left, watching the paramedics trudge back through the snow to their vehicle. "This ends now," Tom said. "I don't care about signatures or votes or procedures. That woman almost killed Patricia." "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked. "I'm thinking I call my plow guy, I pay him double his usual rate, and he clears this entire neighborhood tonight. Sharon can find me all she wants. I'll take her to court. I'll make this a news story. I'll do whatever it takes, but we're getting these streets cleared." I nodded. "I'm in. Split the cost 3 ways. 4, a voice said behind us. We turned to see Deanne Morrison approaching. "I'll chip in too. And I guarantee at least 10 other families will help pay. We're not doing this anymore." By Tuesday evening, we'd collected commitments from 18 families to split the cost of emergency snow removal. Tom's plow guy, a man named Jerry who operated a small snow removal company called Rocky Mountain Clearing, agreed to come out Wednesday morning at 6. He was going to bring 2 trucks and clear every street in Pine Ridge, HOA ban or not. "Just be aware," Jerry told Tom over the phone, and Tom had it on speaker so we could all hear. "If your HOA wants to press charges, they technically can. These are private streets. I'd be trespassing and damaging property according to them." "Let them try," Tom said. "We'll bury them in legal fees." That night, I barely slept. Part of me was excited to see the streets cleared and Sharon's authority challenged. Part of me worried about the escalation. Sharon Whitfield didn't strike me as the type to back down gracefully. She would retaliate, and it wouldn't be pretty. I was up at 5:30 Wednesday morning, coffee brewing, positioned at my window. Marcus showed up at 5:45, and we watched the street together as the sky slowly lightened from black to gray. At 6:02, we heard the rumble of diesel engines. 2 large plow trucks turned onto Pine Ridge Drive, amber lights flashing, blades lowered. It was the most beautiful sight I'd seen all winter. Jerry and his partner made quick work of it. They'd been plowing Colorado streets for 20 years, and even 40-plus inches of snow was just another job. The trucks carved through the accumulation like it was nothing, blades scraping down to pavement, pushing the snow into massive walls along the curbs. The sound was loud, a grinding roar that probably woke up anyone who was still sleeping, but it was the sound of salvation. Sharon's front door flew open at 6:15. She appeared in full winter gear, looking like she'd been waiting for this moment. She had her phone out, recording video, and I could see her mouth moving as she narrated what was happening. Then she did something I didn't expect. She walked directly into the path of the lead plow truck, forcing Jerry to stop. "Oh no," Marcus breathed. "She's going full martyr." I grabbed my coat and ran outside, along with what looked like half the neighborhood. By the time I reached the confrontation, Sharon was screaming at Jerry through his truck window. "You are trespassing on private property. You are violating HOA regulations. I am documenting this and you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Jerry, to his credit, looked more tired than concerned. "Madam, I was hired by residents to clear the streets. If you have an issue, take it up with them." "I have an issue with you. You are the one operating heavy machinery without permission. I have permission from the people who hired me. They don't have the authority to grant permission. The HOA board does." Tom Hendricks pushed through the crowd. "Sharon, get out of the way. The trucks are finishing the job." "I will not. This is illegal. What's illegal is trapping 50 families in their homes during a winter emergency. What's illegal is creating a situation where an elderly woman almost died because she couldn't safely access her property." Patricia slipped. "That's not the HOA's fault." "It's directly the HOA's fault. Your stupid ban created a dangerous situation." More residents were gathering now, at least 30 people standing in the street that was half cleared, watching the confrontation. I could feel the mood shifting. People were angry, really angry. This wasn't just about snow anymore. This was about years of petty regulations, arbitrary rules, and Sharon's authoritarian control finally reaching a breaking point. Linda Wu, one of the other board members, appeared at Sharon's side. "Sharon, maybe we should let them finish. We can address this at an emergency board meeting." "Absolutely not. This is a violation of community policy. This is common sense," someone shouted from the crowd. I couldn't see who. "This is survival," someone else added. "This is mutiny," Sharon snapped, and I realized she actually believed that. She genuinely saw herself as a captain maintaining order, not a tyrant abusing power. Jerry leaned out his truck window. "Look, lady, I'm getting paid either way, but I've got other jobs today. Either move, or I'm backing out and you can deal with your snow yourself." "That's exactly what I want. Back out. Leave." "No," at least a dozen voices shouted in unison. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if Keith Thompson, another board member, hadn't intervened. He was a retired attorney, quiet most of the time, but when he spoke, people listened. "Sharon," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm invoking emergency authority under Section 12 of the HOA bylaws. As a board member, I have the right to temporarily suspend any policy that creates an imminent danger to residents. I'm suspending the snowplow ban effective immediately. These trucks can finish their work." Sharon whirled on him. "You can't do that without a board vote." Section 12, subsection C. Look it up. Emergency powers can be exercised by any board member in situations involving health and safety. We had a medical emergency yesterday. The streets are impassable. I'm well within my rights. I'll have you removed from the board. You're welcome to try. But right now, these trucks are going to finish plowing, and if you don't move, you're going to be charged with obstructing traffic and creating a public safety hazard." I had to admit, watching Keith dress down Sharon in front of half the neighborhood was satisfying in a way I couldn't fully articulate. Sharon's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a furious purple that nearly matched her parka. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I suspect not," Keith agreed. "But for now, move." Sharon moved. Jerry and his partner finished the job, clearing every street in Pine Ridge within 2 hours. By 9 in the morning, you could drive normally through the neighborhood. Cars were being dug out. People were hugging their neighbors. Someone started a group chat to collect money for Jerry, and ended up raising enough to cover his costs plus a generous tip. I thought that would be the end of it. I was naive. Thursday morning, every household received another letter from the HOA. This one announced an emergency special meeting for Saturday at 10 in the morning, to be held at the Pine Ridge Community Center. The agenda included discussing the unauthorized snow removal, potential fines for residents who hired the plow service, and a vote on disciplinary action against Keith Thompson for exceeding his authority. "She's going for blood," Marcus said when he called me. "She wants to punish everyone." "Can she actually fine us?" "According to the bylaws, maybe, but she'd have to prove we individually hired the service, and good luck with that. We split costs between 18 families. How's she going to prove who paid what?" Friday brought a thaw. Temperatures climbed into the 40s, and the massive snow walls along the curbs started to melt, creating rivers of water that rushed down the storm drains. The streets were clear and dry. People were going back to work. Life was returning to normal, but the anger hadn't dissipated. If anything, it had crystallized into something harder and more determined. I spent Friday afternoon doing research. I pulled up the Pine Ridge HOA bylaws, which were a document of stunning complexity and contradictory provisions. But buried in Section 18, I found something interesting. "Very interesting," I called Keith Thompson. "Do you have a minute to talk about HOA law?" "Always," he said, sounding amused. "What did you find?" "Section 18, subsection F. It says any board member who implements a policy that results in documented financial harm to residents can be subject to immediate recall with only a simple majority vote. No need for 60% signatures or 75% approval." There was a pause. "Well," Keith said slowly, "that's fascinating. I've been on this board for 6 years and I never noticed that clause. I'm guessing Sharon hasn't either. I'm guessing Sharon has never actually read the entire bylaws. She just enforces the parts she likes. How would we prove financial harm?" "Tom Hendricks lost work because he couldn't get his truck out. That's lost wages. Diane Morrison had to pay for a hotel in Denver so she could get to her office. That's unexpected expenses directly caused by the snowplow ban. Patricia Green has medical bills from her fall. Even the cost of hiring Jerry could be argued as financial harm, since we wouldn't have needed emergency plowing if the regular service hadn't been banned." "Isaac," Keith said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, "you might have just given us the ammunition we need." "Can you document all of this?" "I can try. Give me until tomorrow morning." I spent Friday evening going door to door, talking to neighbors, collecting stories and receipts. Tom had documentation of 3 days of missed work. Deanne had her hotel receipt. Patricia had hospital bills. 12 other families had various expenses directly traceable to the snow emergency. By Friday night, I had a folder of evidence showing collective financial harm exceeding $12,000. Saturday morning was clear and cold. The community center was a modest building at the edge of Pine Ridge, with a meeting room that could hold maybe 70 people if everyone squeezed in. By 9:45, there were at least 90 people trying to cram inside. Residents were angry, vocal, and prepared for a fight. Sharon called the meeting to order at 10 sharp. She was sitting at a table at the front of the room with the other 4 board members, looking every bit the authoritarian president she aspired to be. She had papers arranged in neat stacks, a gavel that she'd probably bought specifically for moments like this, and an expression of grim determination. "This emergency meeting has been called to address serious violations of community policy," she began. On Wednesday morning, unauthorized snow removal services operated on Pine Ridge streets in direct defiance of a standing ban. This action was taken without board approval and represents a flagrant disregard for community governance. It represents common sense, someone shouted from the back. Sharon banged her gavel. Order. This is a formal proceeding. You'll have time for comments during the public comment period. She went on for another 10 minutes, detailing the various violations, the chain of command that had been broken, the precedent this set for future rule breaking. She proposed fines totaling $5,000 to be split among the residents who had hired Jerry, plus a formal censure of Keith Thompson and his removal from the board. When she finally finished, she opened the floor to public comment. Tom Hendricks was first to the microphone. Sharon, with all due respect, you're out of your mind. Your snowplow ban put lives at risk. It cost residents thousands of dollars in lost wages and unexpected expenses. It made our neighborhood the laughingstock of Aurora. The snow removal on Wednesday wasn't a violation. It was a rescue operation. Your opinion is noted, Sharon said coldly, but policy is policy. Marcus was next. Then let's change the policy. I move to immediately rescind the snowplow ban and restore normal snow removal services. That motion requires a board vote, Sharon said. So let's vote. Sharon looked at her fellow board members. Richard Chambers and Linda Wu looked uncomfortable. Barbara Dennison was actively avoiding eye contact. Keith Thompson looked directly at Sharon and said, I vote yes, rescind the ban. I vote no, Sharon said immediately. Yes, Barbara said quietly. Yes, Linda said. Richard hesitated, then nodded. Yes, 4-1. The snowplow ban was dead. The room erupted in applause, but Sharon banged her gavel hard enough to crack the table. This doesn't change the fact that residents violated the existing policy. The fines still stand. That's when I stood up and walked to the microphone. Actually, Sharon, I don't think they do. I've been reading the bylaws and I found something interesting. Section 18, subsection F. Would you like me to read it aloud? Her eyes narrowed. I'm familiar with the bylaws. Then you know that any board member who implements a policy resulting in documented financial harm to residents can be subject to immediate recall with a simple majority vote of homeowners present at a meeting. I have documentation of over $12,000 in damages directly caused by the snowplow ban. That's financial harm, which means you can be removed from the board right now today if a majority of the residents here vote for it. The silence in the room was absolute. Sharon had gone very pale. Keith Thompson was reading something on his phone, presumably pulling up the bylaws to verify what I just said. Then he looked up and nodded. He's right, Keith said. Section 18, subsection F. I'd forgotten about that clause, but it's valid and it's enforceable. This is ridiculous, Sharon sputtered. You can't just remove me because you disagree with one decision. We're not removing you for disagreeing, Tom said, standing up. We're removing you for gross negligence and abuse of power. How many people here support removing Sharon Whitfield from the HOA board? Hands shot up. I didn't even need to count. It was overwhelming. Easily 70% of the room. This is illegal, Sharon shouted. You can't do this. We just did, Keith said calmly. Sharon, you're removed from the board effective immediately. Please surrender any HOA documents, keys, and access credentials to the remaining board members by end of business today. Sharon stood up so fast her chair fell over. You'll regret this, all of you. I'll sue. I'll take this to court. I'll make your lives miserable. You already did that, Deanne Morrison said. Now we're taking our neighborhood back. Sharon grabbed her papers, her purse, and stormed out of the community center, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The moment she was gone, the room erupted in conversation, relief, and more than a few cheers. Keith called for order. All right, everyone, we still have business to conduct. First order of business. The proposed fines are rescinded. No one will be penalized for the emergency snow removal. Second order of business. We need to elect a new board president. Nominations. I nominate Keith Thompson, Tom said immediately, seconded. At least 5 people called out. Any other nominations? Keith asked. Silence. Then I suppose I'm your new president. God help us all. Third order of business. We need to hire a proper snow removal service for the rest of the season. I move that we contract with Jerry's company for emergency and regular snow removal to be paid from HOA general funds. All in favor. The vote was unanimous. The meeting wrapped up by 11:30. As people filed out, there was a lightness in the air that hadn't existed in days. Neighbors were talking, laughing, making plans to grab lunch together. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. Nice work with the bylaw research. I'm a software consultant. Reading boring documents is basically my entire job. Well, your boring documents just saved this neighborhood. I walked home through streets that were clear and dry, past houses that no longer looked like they were under siege. The crisis was over. The tyrant was deposed. Everything could go back to normal, except Sharon Whitfield wasn't done. On Sunday, I was working in my home office when my phone rang. Unknown number. I normally wouldn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Isaac Xavier? A woman's voice asked, speaking. This is Detective Catherine Morris with the Aurora Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about an HOA dispute in your neighborhood. My stomach dropped. What kind of questions? We received a complaint from a Sharon Whitfield alleging that you and several other residents engaged in harassment, trespassing, and destruction of property. She's requesting that charges be filed. Can you come down to the station to give a statement? I spent Sunday afternoon at the Aurora Police Department, sitting in a bland interview room, explaining the entire Snowplow saga to Detective Morris. She listened patiently, took notes, and asked clarifying questions. When I finished, she sat back and sighed. Let me get this straight, Mrs. Whitfield banned snowplows from your private streets. You hired one anyway because of an emergency, and she's now claiming that constitutes destruction of property, apparently. What property was destroyed? I have no idea. The streets are in better condition now than they were before. And the harassment claims. People yelled at her during a public meeting. That's not harassment. That's democracy. Detective Morris nodded slowly. Mr. Xavier, between you and me, I think Mrs. Whitfield is wasting everyone's time, but I have to follow up on complaints. I'll need to interview the other residents she named, and I'll need to see the HOA bylaws and meeting minutes. But unless something dramatic comes to light, I don't see criminal charges here. This is a civil dispute at worst. So we're not getting arrested for hiring a snowplow. Not unless there's a law against common sense that I'm not aware of. I called Marcus on my way home and filled him in. He laughed so hard I thought he might crash his car. She called the cops on us for removing snow. That woman is unbelievable. The detective thinks it'll go nowhere, but she has to investigate. Good. Let her investigate. We've got documentation, witnesses, and a reasonable explanation for everything we did. Sharon's just flailing because she lost control. Marcus was right. Over the next week, Detective Morris interviewed residents, reviewed documents, and ultimately closed the case with no charges filed. She even sent a formal letter to the HOA explaining that hiring a snow removal service on private streets with the approval of property owners was not criminal activity. But Sharon wasn't done fighting. In mid-February, she filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA, Keith Thompson, and 15 residents including me, Tom, and Marcus. She claimed breach of contract, harassment, defamation, and something called conspiracy to commit board removal. She was seeking $50,000 in damages plus legal fees. The lawsuit was a nuisance, but it was also a miscalculation. Keith Thompson was a retired attorney. He knew exactly how to respond. He filed a motion to dismiss, based on the bylaw provisions that had allowed her removal, and he counter-sued for the documented financial harm caused by her snowplow ban. The case dragged on through February and into March, generating legal fees that Sharon was going to be responsible for once she inevitably lost. Meanwhile, winter continued. We had 2 more significant snowstorms in February, and Jerry's company handled both of them efficiently. Streets were cleared within hours. No one was trapped. No one fell and got injured. The neighborhood functioned exactly the way it should have. Sharon's lawsuit was dismissed in early April. The judge ruled that her removal from the board had followed proper HOA procedures, that no defamation had occurred, and that her claims of harassment were baseless. The judge also ordered her to pay court costs and attorney fees for the defendants. When Keith filed his countersuit for financial damages, Sharon's attorney advised her to settle. She ended up paying $9,000 to cover the documented losses from her snowplow ban. I ran into her at the grocery store in late April. She was in the produce section, examining avocados with the same intensity she'd once applied to HOA regulations. When she saw me, her face went rigid. "I hope you're happy," she said. "I'm not unhappy," I replied. "I'm just glad we can remove snow from our streets like rational human beings." "You destroyed me. You destroyed yourself, Sharon. You had power and you abused it. What did you think would happen?" She didn't answer. She just put down her avocados and walked away. I felt a moment of pity for her, but only a moment. She'd had countless opportunities to compromise, to listen, to act reasonably. She'd chosen tyranny instead. The following winter was blissfully uneventful. Jerry's company plowed our streets regularly. The HOA, under Keith's leadership, approved a reasonable snow removal budget and even negotiated a better rate with Rocky Mountain Clearing. Sharon moved out of Pine Ridge in November, listing her house without telling anyone. A young couple with 2 kids bought the place. They seemed nice. Normal. I still live in Pine Ridge. I still work from home, still have my front row seat to neighborhood drama, though nothing has come close to matching the Great Snowplow War. Marcus and I still get together to watch winter storms roll in, though now we drink our coffee without the schadenfreude. Patricia Green recovered fully from her hip injury and made a point of baking me cookies every Christmas. Tom Hendricks became a board member and pushed through several reforms that made the HOA more transparent and accountable. Keith served as president for 2 years before stepping down and passing the role to Barbara Dennison, who turned out to be excellent at the job. The thing about HOAs is that they're only as good or as bad as the people running them. For 3 years, Pine Ridge had been ruled by someone who saw governance as control and disagreement as insurrection. It took 40 inches of snow and a week of watching people dig out by hand to finally break that grip. I learned something important during that winter. Standing up to petty tyrants isn't just about the big, dramatic confrontation. It's about the steady accumulation of small acts of resistance. It's about documenting harm, organizing neighbors, reading the bylaws, and showing up to meetings. It's about refusing to accept unreasonable rules just because someone with a title says you have to. Sharon probably still thinks she was right. She probably tells the story differently, casting herself as a victim of mob rule rather than the architect of her own downfall. That's fine. I don't need her to understand what she did wrong. I just need my street to be plowed when it snows, and it is. Every time, without fail. The trucks come through, The blades scrape down to pavement, and I watch from my window with my coffee, grateful for the boring competence of normal municipal services. Sometimes I think about that week in January when Sharon sat in her garage with her camera, documenting everyone's struggle, convinced she was maintaining standards and order. What a sad, small way to wield power. What a waste of energy that could have been spent building community instead of controlling it. But that's the thing about petty tyrants. They never see themselves clearly. They never understand that the control they crave is the exact thing that guarantees their downfall. Sharon wanted to be important, to be respected, to matter. She could have achieved all of that by being competent and fair. Instead, she chose to be feared, and when that stopped working, she had nothing left. The last I heard, Sharon had moved to a condo in Denver with no HOA. Maybe she's happier there. Maybe she learned something from the experience. Or maybe she's just biding her time, waiting for another opportunity to impose her will on unwilling subjects. I like to think she learned, but I'm not betting on it. As for Pine Ridge, we're doing fine. Better than fine. We learned that communities are strongest when residents have a voice, when leadership is accountable, and when common sense trumps arbitrary rules. We learned that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when they have titles and bylaws on their side. And we learned that hiring a snowplow to clear 40 inches of snow is not, in fact, a crime. It's just good sense, even if it takes watching your neighbors dig out by hand for a week to make that point.